Hello and welcome to the Home Assistant Podcast. This is episode number 55. Today we're talking about 0.98, a new Docker base, and venturing to South Africa with Cliff. As usual, we've got Phil. Hey, Phil.
Hey, how's it going?
And as I mentioned earlier, we've got Cliff. How's it going, Cliff?
Hey, Rohan.
This episode is sponsored by Home Assistant Cloud by Nabokasa. Easily and securely access your local Home Assistant instance remotely for a small monthly fee that also supports the Home Assistant project. The configuration is done by the user interface, so there's no fiddling with router settings, SSL certificates, or any YAML.
So this is our first guest from the continent of Africa. Would you believe that? We are, 55 episodes in? And
Yeah.
the first time we're going to a new continent for once. I think that leaves only Asia left, maybe. Then we'll have global world domination.
That's right. One continent at a time.
That's it.
But congratulations on being the first person from Africa to join the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here.
No, definitely. So we've got some alerts for Home Assistant. So what I mean by that is there's a new page on the Home Assistant site, which will help you know when a device or a service has introduced a breaking change. So what that means is, so for example, let's say Google Home releases an update that needs an update to Home Assistant, that'll be posted on this site. So right now it just tracks kind of affected Home Assistant version and the integration that's broken. But down the road, they plan to notify users of any errors that they may get and kind of how to fix them. So if you're running like an older version and let's say an API gets changed, then the UI could load a card in your system that says, hey, you know what, you really should upgrade to this version because their API is broken and this service will start working again. So it's a little more proactive in that sense, I think, and that sounds actually really interesting. So that way, hopefully it's a little more, I'm assuming if it's in the Home Assistant UI, hopefully it's tailored to you and to kind of the components you're using. That'll be kind of neat there.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think it's a really good feature, especially when we're trying to debug issues. You know, something breaks down the line and, you know, all of a sudden everyone starts reporting this issue and it starts flooding all the support tickets. Everyone opens an issue. I think if, you know, once it's been declared an issue, then everyone can sort of go, okay, they know it's a problem and there's, you know, it's a known issue. I don't have to go and open up a bug request and put that in and make more noise.
Yeah, exactly. Like, so a lot of times you'll see certificates expire or something like that, right? And whatever that is, hopefully that's just a, hey, click here and you can upgrade and your problem will be fixed.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's a really great idea. And I think we've all kind of, as we've configured our systems, gone through, why it's breaking now. And you're absolutely right. Versus just surfing the GitHub page, it's kind of nice to know if you could go to one page and just kind of take a look before you just flood the GitHub page with a whole bunch of stuff.
Well, exactly, right. Otherwise, you'll have 14 forum entries, a Discord, basically like a whole conversation dedicated to it. And then, you know, just that kind of thing, right? So saves a lot of issues.
Plus, it's reassuring to know that it's a problem that's not your fault. Like, whenever I've come across something that's broken, I'm like, what did I forget to do before I go? And then you've got to go doing a million checks before you actually go and submit that issue. So knowing, you know, giving other people a bit of confidence to go, hang on, it's not you. We know it's a problem. That's a good idea as well.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So you got a confidence factor, right? Boost your ego.
That's it.
So we'll post a link to that, but just verbally, it's alerts.home-assistant.io.
All right. Big change for Docker users in this release. So moving forward from 0.98, there is a new base Docker image for Home Assistant, which is based on Alpine Linux instead of the old Debian. If you're using Docker, which Rohan, you and I will be affected by this. This isn't for Hassle.io, so it's just people that manually install Home Assistant through their own Docker container. You'll notice, I definitely noticed when I installed the beta, there was a whole bunch of new layers being downloaded. So yeah, it's all on Alpine Linux now instead of Debian. You shouldn't have any breaking changes from this. It's, you know, it should be business as usual. It will just mean that, you know, Hassle.io, Home Assistant, and all the other Docker flavors are going to be more in line amongst each other. And I think Frank and Pascal have been putting a lot of work in this release, getting things, you know, aligned and as small as possible. The only potential downside is if you are creating your own custom Docker image based on the Home Assistant base image and you need to install any custom Debian packages, you will need to update your Docker file. There's going to be a new base image, which will be in the Home Assistant Docker Hub repo, which you'll need to use, and you may need to just continue to use that moving forward. But otherwise, it's business as usual with hopefully a lot more of a consistent base image for Home Assistant.
Yeah, just a word of warning as well. If you're on metered data usage or anything like that, you might want to be careful. So if your service provider says, hey, you only get 5 gigs of data a month or whatever that is, just again be aware that the Home Assistant download can be large. So
well, hopefully with this release it'll be much smaller than what it used to be, though.
Alpine is pretty efficient, but just in terms of code itself, right? You just want to be aware of that.
Especially, because there's all those new layers this time as well.
Yeah, exactly.
If you were doing a simple upgrade, most of them would be cached, but this time they're going to be all brand new.
Yeah,
they're actually using manifests now as well. So depending on if you're running it on a Raspberry Pi or a Windows-based system, just doing a simple Docker pull, it will know which version to pull down for your system. So that's a good move as well.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean I think that's it's nice that they're using Alpine as well. It's pretty slim in terms of what it has, right? So which is nice. So on to 0.98. All right, so we're going to start off with talking about web scraping a little bit. So web scraping integrations are now deprecated within Home Assistant. So what that means is Home Assistant essentially will be removing certain components that rely on actual web scraping. And if you're not familiar with what web scraping is, think of your laptop or your computer going in and clicking through a bunch of pages to get a result. And then we're looking at that result and saying, okay, person's name is Rohan based on your login and blah, blah, blah. So same way, there are some integrations that'll actually go log into a website on your behalf and then pull some data from that website, from physically what's displayed on the website. So that's kind of the concept of web scraping there. So what happens is a lot of times when integrations don't offer an API, which is a nice programmatical way of doing things, what ends up happening is people say, okay, you know what, can I web scrape this and pull it from there? These things can break pretty easily when, if let's say as a web developer, I change the design of my website or something like that. So then that means the integration needs to be fixed or rewritten to accommodate that new website. So it causes a lot of inconsistencies and stuff like that. So, and they've also, some vendors like the US Postal Service has banned IPs for users that actually start to do this kind of integration, where you go in and because from their side, it also consumes a lot of bandwidth because it's a very inefficient way of doing this. So as of 0.100, which comes out in about 6 weeks, Home Assistant will be removing the components from those from that release. So it's also less kind of moving parts from what Home Assistant requires. So, hopefully Home Assistant becomes a little more efficient.
Yeah, because I think a few integrations use things. There's one integration that uses, like a Python scraping library.
Yeah.
Another one uses a Node version of the scraping library. So, needing to reduce those will make the overall installation of Home Assistant much more efficient as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think again, web scraping is sometimes it's great because, hey, I just need something up and running and here you go and it works. But it is, like I said, if you change a website, it can break, right? So that's something you typically don't want.
Yeah, and you find with those things, it might be great that it works now, but when it breaks sometime down the future, it's much more frustrating than when it happens to work now. So you probably want a cleaner API-based integration going forward and than relying on this. I know I've done a fair amount of this in the past, and
yeah,
it tends to work for a very short period of time. So I think the frustration of not having it is probably worth it versus it only working for a very short period of time.
Well, exactly, right. So it just means I think it also means that reliability of the system as a whole will kind of go up because it's less stuff breaking, right?
Yeah, and I think as Home Assistant becomes more mature, probably looking for a little bit more stability in it going forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. So there's a few packages that I think that we've identified that will probably get removed. So that's the U.S. Postal Service, FedEx, UPS, SRP Energy, and actually Lynx's access points, believe it or not. So from this perspective, those are kind of what we've identified as might get removed. And the scrape integration, which will actually let you go define a URL and then pull whatever information from there, that'll actually still remain. So if we need to, then that might be a way of automating these.
Right.
I'm wondering if a lot of these, like the FedEx and the UPS sensors that are going to be removed in 0100, if they'll make their way over to the community add-ons, like as a custom component. I think that would be a good place for them if it's still available.
Exactly. And I think at that point, you typically want to be a little more advanced as well. So you know what can break, right? And there can be a lot of warnings and this and that. I think from a core software perspective, it should be stable. Home Assistant has to be stable. And I think this is a step in the right direction towards that.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
All right. Some other new features in this release, and some big overhauls have been done to entity management. So it's now possible to disable entities within Home Assistant. So if you've ever had a component which discovers entities in your home which you don't want, you can now disable them. I know this has been a real pain point for me with like auto discovery.
Yeah.
I've got don't necessarily want Sonos devices to come in all the time. Maybe I don't want a speaker exposed, and because it's auto-discovered, it keeps coming back. So from within Home Assistant now, you can actually choose which device you want disabled, and Home Assistant will just ignore it. Additionally, you can now also tell in integrations, such as device trackers, not to add any new entities to Home Assistant. So if, for example, you have a Wi-Fi device tracker enabled and you install a new phone or someone joins your network, Home Assistant won't automatically add a device tracker to Home Assistant to start tracking that new device on your network. So those are two really good features for entity management. So good to see that's coming along.
That's
nicely.
very cool. Actually, both of those things have been annoying me, so that's great.
Yeah, I think we all suffer for that one.
That's right. Well, it's funny because it's I mentioned in the last episode I kind of got my Raspberry Pi back up and running, and I'm using that for a Zigbee radio. And one of the things I realized too, because the Raspberry Pi is still on the network, it's discovering all the stuff. So in Docker actually has issues just because the way Docker itself is architected. It sometimes has issues with discovery. So with this now, it's just now it's finding all these things that I either manually set in my main Home Assistant instance with which is in Docker, or I want to ignore anyway. So now I've got all these things. There's always like, hey, we found this. It's like, that's great. I don't want it, and it comes back, and yeah. So that's definitely nice to have.
Yeah.
Integrations now can give you the option to set specific options from the UI itself. So things like decons and unify integrations, you don't necessarily need to go into the YAML to go add specific options. You can do it right from the UI. So that's pretty handy. So if you're trying to get away from using YAML and trying to go more just straight from the UI, that's it's definitely for you.
Yeah, I think only those two components are supported from now, but
yeah,
I think moving forward, once everything starts going over, like just being able to go into the UI and clicking checkboxes to enable this feature, enable that, that'll be awesome.
Yeah, and I think that's slightly reliant on the integration developer as well. I'm assuming that they would have to actually pull that in.
Yeah, but you can see how things are progressing so nicely, right? I mean, I look at my Lovelife's editing these days, and I'm never in the YAML. The editor is more than sufficient to do really good stuff. So if you've been working with it for a couple of years now, you can see how it's very quickly moving to a user-based, front-end based configuration.
Absolutely.
But so it's good to see.
I agree completely.
All right. If you are the owner of a Ring camera that contains either a siren or a light, they're now supported in Home Assistant. So there will be switches exposed. So if your Ring camera has a siren attached, there'll be a switch for it. When you flick that switch on, the siren will sound on the particular camera. And also, if your camera has a light, or maybe you're using one of those Ring Garden spotlights and it is exposed via the Ring API, you can now turn those lights on and on. So that's a good little addition for
Yeah,
Ring users.
and your children may have a great time playing with those sirens. So,
Actually, there's if you're using the group all switches, you might want to be careful if you actually use that to turn things on, because you will turn those sirens on.
That's a great point. You're, I'm sure your neighbors may not appreciate that if you're within close proximity. So also, the GeoNet New Zealand Quakes feed is now integrated. So any quakes that have happened in New Zealand region in the last 7 days, this integration can actually go in and retrieve incidents based on this feed and kind of show, hey, here's what's happened, and kind of you can apparently it'll filter it by distance as well to wherever location you have set in Home Assistant, which is kind of neat.
I really want to know how people are using these, especially like how is your home reacting to an event that's happened 7 days ago?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, an earthquake can trigger, tsunamis and stuff, but I wonder if there's any, if anyone's doing any cool automations based on, if an event's happened, how does your house react? I'd really like to hear anyone that's running.
Yeah, that's actually kind of interesting because I was kind of wondering that myself. So, what do you do with the data post it happening, or is it just like hey, you don't have to Google it and the information's here now? So, which
you can just look. Yeah,
which I think is kind of neat as well. But yeah,
I suppose there's a chance of aftershock sometimes as well that people might.
That's also true. But from a 7 day kind of lookup, I'm not sure what kind of stuff you'll get. But or maybe I don't know what kind of data it's providing inbound. So maybe people like to graph it or do something like that. I'm not sure.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So again, depending, I guess, on the type of data it provides, I'm not exactly familiar with that one. So.
And Lutron uses the Lutron RA2 occupancy sensor is now supported in Home Assistant. So if you want to add another device tracker to get some better information on who's home or not, that's now available.
Perfect. Some breaking changes. So there are a couple of things this week that are breaking. So unique identifiers are being fixed on some Zigbee devices for if you're using the ZHA component. So there was a bit of a stability issue in terms of the unique ID on the cluster channels. So if basically a node got a new network address, then that unique identifier would change. So now what we do is, instead of using what we used to use before, we're actually using the IEEE address instead of the network address to uniquely identify the device. So that way that never changes. Otherwise you might have to re-add that to automations, things like that. So if you opted to use your unique ID in any events or any automations like that, you need to update those.
Just off while we're talking about the ZHA, how's your Zigbee network going, Rohan? You got a combi and
yeah. So far so good. I mean, it's been running for I don't know how long now, 3 weeks, something like that.
Yeah, about that. Yeah.
3 or 4 weeks, and so far so good. I know there have been some people with ZHA that complained about stability issues or any of that. I mean, knocking on wood, I haven't really hit any of those kind of issues. And yeah, I've got a couple of devices left to add that I just haven't added yet, like my door opens, close sensors and stuff. That stuff's still on smart things. I just need to reset it.
Yep.
But outside of that, I mean, it's been good. I think one point I had to, this is when I first started. I'm not sure what happened, but it just stopped seeing the devices, and then I just rebooted once or maybe twice and then came back, which is a little bit annoying, but I haven't had that issue since. So it's been fairly stable, I think. Okay. Not a ton of issues here. And I'm actually using a custom component to pull all of those events and state and all that stuff over, and it works amazing.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, so it's I was typically, and I mean, you and I, Phil, were talking about this, and I was looking at using MQTT and saying, hey, do I use MQTT to use a state sync, essentially, right? Hey, there's motion, great, it triggers.
Yeah.
And then that sends it to MQTT, where my main instance picks it up, which is how most people do it today. There's actually I'm not sure if it's abandoned or what, but there's a custom component project that somebody was working on where basically it leverages the API. And my conversation with you, Phil, is I was kind of looking for exactly that, which is Home Assistant's got a great API. So why can't I utilize this API to pull in the state and all that stuff real time? So I'm not sure exactly what's going on under the covers. I'm assuming it's webhooks of some kind where we're pulling information to essentially stream it from one instance to the other. But
so one Home Assistant instance to your other Home Assistant instance.
Yeah,
correct?
exactly.
Like one's running. Yeah.
And it's running beautifully. I actually find it faster because right now my SmartThings is still using the old school MQTT for synchronization, just because the native integration actually, just because the way my network is set up, I had issues with having it communicate inbound. So I opted to stick with the old, very kind of legacy, SmartThings integration is what it was called, which is basically SmartThings pushes to MQTT and then MQTT pushes to Home Assistant and then vice versa. So, but yeah, no, this I find actually works quite a bit faster. So when there's motion detected, pretty much when that instance sees motion, when my Raspberry Pi, which has my Zigbee stick in it, when that detects motion, it basically almost instantly, my main instance has it detected. So I'm extremely happy with it, at least so far. Again, knock on wood that it doesn't break right after I finish saying this, which is usually what happens when I say, hey, I've had great luck with stuff. And hopefully that doesn't happen. But no, again, it's been great. So I'm actually very satisfied. And once again, I said this last episode, but thanks for everyone who kind of guided me through the Zigbee radios and kind of what I should do and all of that kind of stuff. But yeah.
Awesome. All right. We better get back to the breaking changes after we've had that little detour.
That's right.
But
I digress. Yeah.
The updater component has been changed to a binary sensor. So now if you're doing any automations to find out when the latest version of Home Assistant has been released, the updater.updater entity no longer exists, and you'll have to use the binary sensor. And it will always be either on or off. On meaning that there is a new update available.
So I suspect this is going to affect quite a few people, but if you use Kodi, so Kodi services have now moved from Media Player to Kodi. So what that means is in the past, it would be something like mediaplayer.kodi add to playlist. Now it's kind of just Kodi add to playlist. And then same way, Kodi call to method is now Kodi.call method. And so the reason behind this, I suspect, is, again, from a more standardization perspective, because typically your media component isn't necessarily tied to a specific component, the service that you call from it. So that's, I suspect it's just that from a service perspective, you want to keep it pretty standard,
yeah,
right? So
we've seen this a lot. I think Plex and Sonos have done the same thing in recent versions as well. You know, they've been moving across to their own domains. So yeah, this makes sense, I think.
Yeah, totally.
The Sonos devices have now been updated with their Play Media Service calls. So previously, if you were trying to play a Sonos playlist, you weren't able to do it with a simple call to Play Media. You can now specify in the media type, you can specify playlist and give it a Sonos playlist ID, and it will start playing. As part of this update as well, and this is why it's a breaking change, if you decide to send something, for example, a media type of TV or media type of video to a Sonos device, which can only support music, that service call will now fail and will be rejected because, you know, we're now validating what type of media you can send to the Sonos devices. So I think it's really cool to see that playlist support is being added to Sonos. I think a couple of releases ago, there's a Spotify playlist support was added. So it's cool to see, you know, more support being added for Sonos.
So the Google Home component has been removed. So what that means is Google Home devices basically a while ago received an update which prevents it from being used as device trackers. So I think we actually talked about this a while ago in a few episodes, I guess a bunch of episodes before, where you're able to use your Google Homes as device trackers. So they actually have a little monitor in there that basically says, hey, what BLE devices are walking by me, so on and so forth. So based on that, it'll take the MAC address and it was actually accessible. So Google shut that down. I'm not sure if there was like a privacy thing or something like that why they did it, but they basically no longer allow you to do that. So if you're looking for a replacement way, there's quite a few different methods. Check out Monitor from Andrew Freyer. We'll leave the links in the show notes and check that out.
Yeah. And that monitor one's actually really cool for room-based presence as well, if you want to go to that level. So highly recommend checking that out.
Yeah, so that's pretty neat. I think my problem with presence is, so between myself and my girlfriend, both of us have iOS devices, which if you're familiar with how they do presence, so just because what happens is, believe it or not, there's a lot of organizations and like retail stores, things like that, that try and track their customers. How are you walking? Where are you going through the store? Who are you, for better or for worse? They don't care about, hey, this is Rohan or this is Phil. They care about, hey, this is this device, and then based on this device, you're doing so on and so forth. So a while ago, Apple took the proactive approach of saying, hey, we want to protect our users' privacy. And the way of doing that is by randomizing that MAC address that basically gets beaconed out. So, which is great from a privacy perspective. Now, for Home Assistant, what that
Not so
basically
great.
translates to, so I'm not sure how if there's any good ways to get around this, or what there is. But if anybody's figured that out, let us know, because I'm personally curious, because I have looked into doing room presence before, and I kind of went, you know what, I'm not going to deal with it. It's not worth the effort right now to deal with, hey, I've got all these my phone randomizing MAC addresses, things like that, and saying, okay, well, great, now this is device 1, device 2, device 3, and I have 6,000 different devices that were found in Home Assistant. Right? None of them actually mapping to me.
Is there an ability in the settings to turn that off? Do you know?
You know what? I'm assuming there's something somewhere where somebody's figured it out, because I know people are doing this, and maybe it's only Android users that are doing this. I'm still looking for a good way as an iOS user, natively from my phone, to be able to do it. Because I know there are people that carry Bluetooth dongles with them and stuff. And it's like, I carry an RFID card at work. I don't want to feel like I'm at work at home, where I'm carrying around a little card or a BLE beacon in my pocket or something like that. I always have my phone, which is a BLE device. So I'd love to use that if I can. If anybody's got any tips, just hit us up at feedback@haspodcast.io. Let us know.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, that room presence is always tricky. There are some smartwatches that broadcast BTLE that I see some guys are using to track presence, where it's not another device that you carry.
Yeah, like a Xiaomi fitness band or something.
Yeah,
there's a lot of those as well.
exactly.
Yeah, my problem is I don't like I wear watches whenever I'm out all the time, and if I don't, I actually feel weird. A lot of times my time on my watch is wrong, and I've had my like managers come up to me and be like, "Man, what time zone is your watch in?" It's like, it's not. It's like an automatic watch, and I just never set it for like the last year, right? And you know what? It's not even for accessory.
Exactly.
I don't do it for fashion. But I don't. This doesn't bother me when I'm home, but when I'm out, I actually feel like something's missing, and like it's because I'm so used to wearing it, so it's like I don't have that weight on my hand, right? So it's like
almost like a safety blanket for you.
Yeah,
I know it's such a weird kind of thing, but it's so. But at home, I never wear these kind of watches, right? And I know I'm not the only one that's like that, right? Like
I'm exactly the same.
When I'm home, I want to be like, okay, I'm in a t-shirt, I'm in comfy pants, I'm not wearing accessories, whatever, and yeah, so
yeah.
But maybe all the problems I'm talking about on iOS have been resolved, and I just haven't bothered to Google it. That's entirely possible. Yeah, if whoever's got this figured out, let me know.
All right. If you're using Z-Wave, there is a service called update_config, which you'd think would go ahead and poll all your devices and update your Z-Wave configuration file. Unfortunately, that has not worked for quite some time. There's a bug in the underlying library that Home Assistant uses, which is a fork of OpenZWave. So that service doesn't do anything, and a lot of people have been, hitting that, call service on that update config for a time and, thinking that it's doing something when it hasn't been doing anything. So as of this release, just to remove all confusion, the zwave.update_config service has been removed. So if you're wondering where it's gone for a reason, and it's because it wasn't doing anything to begin with. And finally, for this release, it was a little noteworthy update for you. HomeKit users, CO2 sensors are now supported for Home Assistant. So if you're into that, whole safety and wanting your house to react if there's an alarm or an alert about something, CO2 sensors are now supported.
Very cool. All right, Cliff. This is where we start talking about you. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Cool. Yeah, so I'm an engineer. I'm a elec eng by training. I kind of did that for a couple of years, so I got a bit of electronic experience, but I was always kind of a software guy. So I spent probably most of my professional life in the software business. I wrote a bunch of software in the good old days. Did a bunch of internet stuff, and then I joined Microsoft about 18 years ago, and I spent a bunch of time in Microsoft in various different roles. But always kind of in the dev space. Recently I left to start a software startup. So I guess kind of finishing the software life cycle, and it's kind of it's interesting being on the on the startup side, kind of having to build software from scratch. But I guess much like the Home Assistant story, there's so much good stuff out there these days that if you've got an idea. Software is really your imagination is the only limit. So, yeah, that's kind of my story. That's who I am.
That's very cool.
Yeah, and the home automation thing, I guess, has kind of always been something that I've been passionate about. I guess it's so interesting because it combines that world of software and hardware. You kind of need things, and you need sensors, and you need controllers, and then you need the smart stuff to kind of take all that data and do something with it. So. Yeah, when I was young and I had much more time on my hands before I had kids, I looked around at sort of the year 2000s, that type of era, and there really wasn't too much going on. I mean, it was kind of before X10 was really big, and so I ended up building a bunch of stuff myself. I ended up building a little circuit board, and I soldered relays onto it and connected it to a Wi-Fi device and controlled my irrigation, and I was super proud of that until the lightning came along and took it out. So we're unfortunately, and then you realize how this custom stuff is just a pain, right? I mean, when you're doing everything yourself, it's like when it breaks, and so I never really recovered from that.
No, it's not like you can go out to a store and just buy another one and set it up.
Yeah. You also learned the importance of lightning arresters and or grounding.
Spot on. But down here in the southern end of Africa, we get some pretty vicious lightning storms. So yeah, we do our best, but sometimes, I mean, we go through routers and modems when we used to do copper before we had fiber. It wasn't uncommon to burn 1 or 2 a year on them.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. So then I guess X10 came around, and I kind of played with X10 for a couple of years, and you very quickly kind of get the limitations. I mean, you don't get any feedback. It's kind of fire and forget, right? So you assume the light is on, or you assume exactly. So I think we've all kind of been down that road. But it was great to be able to actually have something that was probably, I guess, a bit more off the shelf, and that's actually where I discovered Home Assistant. Like I was like, I need something to pull all this stuff together, because I sort of wrote a very crude web page to control it at the beginning, and then I discovered Home Assistant. I was like, wow, this is great. This is these are my people.
Did you try anything before Home Assistant?
I didn't actually. I did a bunch of research, and I read the forums, and I really like kind of the open source community side of Home Assistant, which drew me there, right? It's really nice to see when you have a huge active community, and the community seemed really, really good at supporting each other, and that's honestly why I chose it. I never did any of the other ones. I've just kind of always bet on Home Assistant, and I've never looked back. It's been fantastic.
That's awesome. So do you use any of those X10 devices still, just out of curiosity?
I actually do. So
Awesome.
I guess I'm very fortunate and have a small weekend house. And I played on the X10 stuff on my small weekend house, and so I've left that stuff there. So it actually still is running. I still use the X10 add-in for HAS to do it, and I guess I just never ripped out all of those devices. Actually, the primary reason is I haven't found a really great sort of controller, a dimmer. And I had a whole bunch of dimmers that I had that ran off X10, and they worked really well. I bought nice big ones. So I haven't found a really good price dimmer. I know that I've looked at the 2-year stuff. I could probably go there sometime, but But yeah, that's kind of why I've left it. And
Yeah.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it, maybe.
yeah, spot on.
Yeah,
And I guess as we all know, right? Once it becomes production ready in the house, you kind of need
Don't change it.
You need license from the family to change it, right?
That's right.
So yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah, and then recently I renovated my house. We did a pretty extensive renovation, and so I kind of took the opportunity to in quotes do it right. I think I drove my electrician who was working in the house absolutely mad because we kind of made the decision that we'd make every single light switch in the house a son-off device.
Oh wow.
And we did the Ubiquiti thing and pulled Ubiquiti cables through the house, so we have 4 or 5 Ubiquiti endpoints dotted around the house just so our Wi-Fi coverage is great.
Wow.
And yeah, it turned out really well. I just I have probably about 50 or 60 light switches that are all son-off basic devices that I just wired up and have on Tasmoda.
Yep.
And that all feeds into Home Assistant. And yeah, I think my wife was a little skeptical at the beginning. I went, what is he actually trying to do with this? And it turned out really well. I mean, it's amazing to see. I guess one of the things that I learned was, it's okay to do 1 or 2 lights, and it's kind of interesting, and you kind of it's fun. But you get really frustrated when you actually want to go to bed and you can't turn off that kitchen light because you haven't wired it in, right?
Yep.
So I decided, okay, let's just do everything. Let's just make sure that we can do everything. And I guess when you renovate, it's kind of that opportunity to do it properly.
Yeah.
So yeah, it turned out really well.
Until you're done renovating and you're like, you start using it for a few weeks and you're like, man, I really wish I did that. It's like,
Oh, there's always that. There's absolutely always that.
Yeah.
But again, it's one of the beauties of kind of where the tech is going and having Wi-Fi devices that you can drop in and you don't have to cable up. So as long as you got power on these days, even battery these days.
Yeah.
You can actually learn and as you go along. Yeah, so one of the big things for me in doing the whole house was I made this decision to put a 32-inch touchscreen in the kitchen, and so I'm running my Lovelace interface on a reasonably large device because I first tried it on an iPad that I stuck to the wall, but I guess it wasn't as interactive as I wanted it to be. I besides all the light switches, I kind of collected a bunch of weather data, and I built a little weather station, and I wired in the irrigation system, and all of that stuff. And I found that the smaller devices were like a little pokey, and so I tried it. I found a really nice device that's sort of a 32-inch screen that's got an embedded Android operating system on it.
Wow.
Plus an HDMI input, so it's kind of like our TV.
Yeah.
With that runs Android,
Wow.
so you can flip between the two.
And it's all touchscreen.
And it's a touchscreen, yeah. It uses one of those infrared touch bezels, but it's basic. So really, the only thing I run on that Chrome OS is on that Android OS is Chrome, and the only thing I run on that Chrome is Home Assistant. So Lovelace renders beautifully on it, and it's really interesting to kind of see the interaction of the family with it, right? People will get up in the morning, walk to it. I kind of pull the weather data. I was inspired by some of your previous guests on pulling the weather data into the UI. So I found a really nice weather service. I use Meteor Blue, California based, and they just give great accurate weather data for us down here.
Nice.
And if you ask them nicely, they'll give you a free API key for home use, and I just have a very small automation that pulls the image down and then pops it into the Lovelace interface, and then you kind of have the real weather based on temperature sensors outside, and it's amazing to see how people interact with it. So yeah, that's been really big. I've really enjoyed that, and it's nice to see people use it, or everybody in the family use it in the house.
That's cool. So how is that kind of? So this is interesting because I don't think we've ever talked to anybody. Like we've talked to people with panels and things like that, right? But how is having just a large screen, right? I mean, specifically for Home Assistant, it's very large screen.
32 inches. Like that's a TV.
That is a TV. Right? And
Yeah.
So
How many columns is your Lovelace UI? Like,
so it's 1920 by 1080, so it's 1080p resolution. But then of course you can scale it a little bit if you want. So
right.
Yeah, I can fit, and it's actually a great question because I can fit a whole bunch on one page now, which is really nice. So you kind of get this. My overview page has a ton of information. It has, it has all the Ubiquiti cameras. I have 2 Ubiquiti cameras in the house feeding in, and I have a live view of that. I have the weather data. I have a bunch of lights, and then I have we've sort of through trial and error developed a whole bunch of automations that that have kind of been useful. So. Yeah, we got some buttons on there to fire automations, so that we really don't flip around too much. The resolution is enough to almost run almost everything on a single page, which is fantastic, right? It's just one panel.
That's awesome. So have you so with like the way you interact with it today? So like, because you said it's in your kitchen as well. So I'm guessing, like, let's say, for example, I think you mentioned you had kids. So like they come downstairs or whatever, They go to the kitchen for, let's say, breakfast, whatever. And did they interact with it? Is there any specific stuff for them that you're doing or?
Yeah. So I guess one of the other big ones for us was, we have a home alarm system, and we kind of have an inside alarm and an outside alarm. So we have 1 or 2 beams outside in the garden. So the kids, we were always tripping the alarm, right? The kids would run outside and trip the alarm. And so now I have the Lovelace alarm control sitting right there on that front page. And they've learned very quickly that they can look at the screen, see if the alarm's on, hit the button, and turn the alarm off, and it's made such a massive difference.
That's
right?
cool.
So that's probably one of their biggest ones. And then I guess the one my wife loves the most is we have an automation. We call it the kids call button. So we don't have a Google Home or any audio devices in any of the kids' rooms, but we were always yelling at them to come down for dinner, and I got tired of yelling at them. So I thought, well, we've automated the lights, so how about I put a button on the screen, and what it does is it flashes the lights in the kids' room 4 or 5 times. It works like such a charm, right? You hit that button, and about 5 seconds later, the kids arrive in the kitchen. So and my wife absolutely loves that.
That's so funny. That's actually pretty great. But that's an interesting way, right? Because most people, a lot of people that I've talked to, at least, they'll just stick another Amazon Echo or Google Home or something like that, and then just do like an announce or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So this is great. Yeah. It's a good, effective way of keeping them. You might not necessarily want your kids around that, depending on how old they are or whatever. Right. And then it's a great way of doing it, right? You can always fall back to analog whenever you don't want digital.
Exactly. Well, the other thing was I thought about the audio one, but my daughter loves sitting on her iPad with earphones. So
of course.
I could announce all I want, and she wouldn't hear a thing. Right? Whereas the lights are like, you can't ignore it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's true. If you have headphones on, if you've got whatever, it's definitely in your face.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I guess unless it's super bright out, like in the room or whatever, like if they've got that, and then you may not see it, but
it works majority of the time.
That's super cool.
The other one that's kind of interesting is we were talking about presence previously, and I was kind of trying to mess with presence to see. We have a gate getting into the house. We have one of those automated gates that slide open. And I was always faffing with seeing if my phone gets onto the home Wi-Fi, and if I'm on the home Wi-Fi and I was away, so I was kind of using presence to figure out, should I open the gate? But I mean, first of all, it takes a little while for the device to get on Wi-Fi, even though it's in range. So it was really frustrating.
Yeah. Yep.
So then I discovered webhooks, and I thought, well, that's interesting, because now you don't have to be on the home network to kind of fire stuff externally. So I built a separate Raspberry Pi based home assistant. So my home has 2. I have one that's external facing, exposing webhooks. And really, that's all it does. It's just a really simple webhook to MQTT bridge, if you want to think about it like that. And I kind of sat behind Frank's great work that he did with all the firewall stuff. So I'm using Nginx as a firewall to just proxy all the stuff back in. And now you can kind of drive down the driveway or kind of be wherever you are. As long as you got an internet connection, you can hit a button on the phone. Or I found people doing some really cool work on most of the smartwatches that'll just fire a web request So I just hit a button on my watch typically, and the front gate opens, and so that's really turned out very nice. That's really
that's pretty neat.
fun little project.
Neat.
That's very cool.
Yeah,
Did you have that set up for everyone in the house or just yourself?
just myself and my wife.
Right.
So I kind of guard those webhooks quite carefully. Not the kids actually, because they're not old enough to drive yet.
Yeah.
So they don't really. I don't really want them opening and closing the gate.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, I guess that's one thing that's probably lots of us are waiting for, is the day we can kind of have customized Lovelace interfaces would be really great, right? You kind of see that use case building more and more as you start integrating it deeper and deeper into the home. But
Yeah, like you can have an interface based on who's home.
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you deal with and I know this is one of Phil's bigger gripes, is when your internet goes out, how do you deal with that when it comes to like opening the gate, for example? So like if you're not connected to your network and you're firing off your something from your phone or from your watch or whatever, again, that does traverse the internet and then come back in. And if your internet's down at home, have you had that situation, or what's the how do you deal with that?
You have a fallback, I guess.
It's a great question. I mean, knock on wood, our internet's really reliable. We've just we're going through a massive fiber rollout in the country,
Nice.
so lots of our fibers are brand new, and it's pretty well managed. So actually, I've never had an outage, which is
Wow. Your provider should talk to Phil.
18 months.
He's
Talk to my government, actually. Let's hear what.
Yeah. Well, just before we got fiber, we were in exactly the same boat.
Yeah.
But I did think about it, and I do actually have I see they're deprecated now, but I do have a Linksys router that has a cellular connection on. So my plan was to run it, just see how well it works, and if it did become a problem, to kind of have a fallback to a cellular based router. And then I was messing with how I could actually figure that out from Home Assistant, and then provide just the webhook access to the router. But then we do still have the old analog remote control button in the car that we kind of keep on.
okay. So there's still
you don't. Yeah, and I put a little keypad at the gate as well, so if you really do need to get in.
Perfect.
you
Okay.
can get in. Yeah, but and I kind of did the same thing with the garage doors, and kind of have a sign-off device sitting in the garage doors, and you open the garage, open the front gate.
Right.
But it's a great question. It crossed my mind often. It's like we now have a massive dependency on this thing on the internet, and I think you guys were discussing it in a previous episode, to see how much stuff breaks when there's not an internet connection, even though you think lots of the stuff is in the local loop, and it is surprising when you do. I actually tested it. I turned off the router to see it. It's pretty spectacular what happens when you don't have an internet.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah. The next few episodes are going to be dedicated to me making fun of Phil. With his internet outage woes, and mine lately has not been. Mine's actually for the last 4 years has been super stable, and then after Phil started having his issues and complaining about it, and naturally me making fun of him for it, karma kind of caught up with me, and I've been maybe once a week I'll have an outage for 2 hours or something like that, and it's
oh no,
oh man, and it's always when I want to watch TV or when I want to do something, and it's just. Yeah, so it's
always.
It's karma at its finest.
Oh my goodness, absolutely. Yeah, so I think just some other comments. I think the Lovelace change has just been huge for us, right? I mean, for the ability to produce such a nice looking UI, and I can get a bit UXy. So I built my own custom theme just to kind of play with the colors that I liked, and I mean, it's incredible to see what the team is doing around that, and just the community, right? I mean, some of the custom cards you can get. I'm using a lot of the custom graphing cards. I'm using the custom media player card. It really allows you to produce a front end that doesn't just work, but actually looks really good. And I think being in software, you realize that a lot of usability is just also the ease of use and how well it works. So it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's funny when I started using Lovelace, and I was just like, okay, there's all this stuff you can do, and I was like, I don't care, I'm not using it, whatever. Because I use voice primarily. Yeah. And then I don't know, a few months ago, I was just like, all right, what, let's play with this. Let's organize things, because it was getting kind of messy. It was getting out of hand, and I was like, whenever I did need to override anything, either from my phone or through the laptop, it's like scroll. Oh, I missed it. Scroll back, right? And it just gets really annoying.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, I'm going to choose. And I actually had a lot of fun with it. There's so many really cool cards out there. There's so many really cool custom components that people are doing. And a lot of times custom components are, hey, they're working towards having it in Home Assistant. They're just not there yet, or, and stuff does break with custom components. I'm not saying it doesn't, but it's still great to see what people are doing, right?
And at least they've got the capability to have it there, right? Like, as opposed to just being stuck with the standard stuff. Everyone has the ability to go in and create their own thing.
Totally.
Yeah, spot on.
So what kind of stuff? Are you using? So I know you mentioned Tasmota. You mentioned how you have your connected gate and stuff. So what else? What else are you doing in the house? You said cameras.
Yeah. So I guess my Home Assistant. I also grew out of the Raspberry Pi and into a Docker set of Docker images. So I actually repurposed an old Mac Mini that I had. Put a solid state disk in it, and then I'm running Ubuntu on it with Docker. And that's fantastic. I use Portainer to manage the Docker images. And actually, one of the nicest things about it is there's a button on Portainer that says recreate. They should probably rename it. But that actually, if you hit that button, it doesn't only recreate; it'll pull the latest version. So that's my upgrade protocol. You just really hit the button and you upgrade. So that is fantastic. And it's super stable and it runs really quick. I mean, I guess we've all been through the round of editing of rebooting because of a YAML change, and I think you kind of very pleasantly surprised when you move from the Raspberry Pi to a Docker.
Oh, how fast it is! Yeah.
And then I pretty much standardized on Sonoff devices just because of the price and the they're relatively available here. They're cheap. So I have hundreds, well, not hundreds, probably close to 100 of them all over. For non-Sonoff devices, I mostly use Tasmota, but I've been using ESP Home a fair amount now. I think Otto is doing a really nice job with ESP Home, I guess. Seems to be, for specific devices. So I built a controller for my home irrigation system again, kind of a revival of my previous project, and I just used a D1 Mini and ESP Home YAML to run that. Just a bunch of really MQTT endpoints. So the brains is kind of sitting inside Home Assistant to control that, and it's incredible to see how simple it actually is, right? I mean, with an ESP Home and an ESP8266 device, you can control almost anything.
Yeah, it's kind of your mind is where the barrier is, right? Whatever you can think of.
Yeah, exactly. And then I have a bunch of temperature devices, I guess, like we all do. So I just wired because I have a Sonoff device in every light switch pretty much. I basically got a target for a temperature sensor. So some of the light switches I just wired the DS1820Bs, the little Dallas, the one wire devices. And I hang a little temperature sensor at the bottom of the light switch in most rooms. So it doubles up as a light switch and a temperature sensor. And it's kind of neat because it has power, so I don't have to worry about batteries or anything like that. And so I get temperature in most of the rooms just through using Tasmota and the Sonoff devices. And then on the camera side, I really like the Ubiquity stuff. It works really well. I know it's a little more pricey than some of it, but I have several outdoor cameras. So indoor I have some of the cheaper devices, but outdoor I use the Ubiquity devices, and the integration to Home Assistant is superb. I guess as you would expect, knowing where Palace is. But the server works really well, and the feeds are beautiful into the Lovelace interface. So our main interface has all the camera feeds feeding.
That's cool, and I guess on your screen it would show up really nice too, right? In the kitchen, it's just because it's a large screen. So
exactly. So
are you leveraging the live views? So it's actually streaming?
Yeah, I am actually. And that was a nice change. So I actually have on the main kitchen device. I actually don't. I let it update it at sort of 10 second or wherever it fires at. But I have another smaller tablet sitting at the front door that has a camera over the driveway, and that the live view was really great for, because when somebody's pulling in with a car, you kind of want to take a look and see where the car actually is, and it's frustrating if it only updates every 5 seconds. So I kind of have two devices. So that works really well. It was a
Yeah,
really
yeah.
cool change there.
So, do you have any concerns with the amount of Sonoff devices you're running in terms of, the quality of Sonoff devices? I know they're sort of seen as a cheap, controller that may not necessarily have as good as, like in terms of fire rating and, sparking and all that.
Yeah.
Have you had any concern? Like,
Yeah.
did you have any problems getting, an electrician to install them? Did they have any worries about that?
Yeah, actually, so I probably bought 60 or 70 of them. So I've
Wow.
really gone, and I've got V1s, V2s, and V3s.
You committed very hard.
Yeah. I lost in the installation. I lost probably about 5 or 10 that just malfunctioned, or you also got to. Electricians tend to be a little bit more brutal with the devices than normal
Yeah.
people would. I walked in one day and the guy was connecting them live, so he didn't.
Oh, that's safe. Yeah.
Oh,
power.
wow.
So,
Yeah.
exactly. So I don't think they like that very much, because of course it's arcing a little bit as it's turning on. So I think it was a combination of some devices, but also probably the way he was installing them. But no, in general, I've been very happy with them. I haven't once I kind of fixed some of the ones that were a little unstable. I lost maybe one or two kind of after I went live, and you can just see the Wi-Fi stack was probably a little dodgy, right? And again, the point you make, Phil, I think some of the soldering is not always the best. But for the price you pay for them, I was like, if I have a 2, 3, 4% failure rate, it's still a lot cheaper than buying other devices. Yeah, and I have used some of the Shelly devices, which I know have a better fire rating, and I think they're competing quite heavily. So if you look at where the Shelly devices are going, they've just received a better fire rating, and they have better plastics. But I guess you need to take a point in time. So once they're live and they're running, I've actually been pretty happy with them. I haven't lost them. So. The electrician seemed pretty happy with it. I mean, I was pretty dead set on him doing the installation, so that of course we get a sign off after the renovation was done. But he didn't have a big issue with them. I think his biggest issue was how small the little screws were to get the copper wires in. He was like, "Why do they have to make the hole so small? It's the size of the copper wire rather than the light switch, and it's minute." But yeah, it's actually pleasantly surprised. I guess, knock on wood, right? It's probably a year in, so we're heading for a year in, and they've been pretty good actually.
So if they're all Wi-Fi based, have you got them on their own Wi-Fi network that's separate from your computers and your local network? Have you segregated them that way?
Yeah, that's again great question. I didn't actually. I just hung them off all the same network, and I've been meaning to. So if I had to do it again, I probably would create an IoT style network and bridge between the two. And the Ubiquity stuff is really good at allowing you to do that. So I guess again, it ain't broken, and I'm not fixing it right now. I think with the number of Wi-Fi access points that I have hanging around the house, I have no issue with with devices falling off the network. So it's not a connectivity issue. It's not a physical Wi-Fi issue. Sure. It's just probably a security concern, if anything. I use the Ubiquity firewall stuff as well. So I have a reasonable amount of trust, and I don't expose too much stuff in my house out to the internet. But of course, you never know. But I don't use any cloud-based stuff on the IoT network. Everything runs local. So I guess my potential exposure external, because you're running Tasmota, you're not running any of the stock firmware, is probably a little bit less. But yeah, it is absolutely consideration. I think if I had the time, I'd probably slice off an IoT network and just allow MQTT and maybe some of the HTTP protocols to filter between the networks.
I just hope you never have to change Wi-Fi password, because that's going to be a pain in the bum to have to walk around and update every single one to a new Wi-Fi network.
Well, I have a story on that. So I actually I had a discussion with the Tasmota guys when I was doing this, because I pre-configured all the devices before they put them in. So I had about 50 or 60 devices that I pre-configured, each with their own address, their name, etc., etc. And then the electrician installed them, and Tasmota unbeknownst to me, has this feature that if you cycle the power
Right.
3 or 4 times in quick succession, it resets the device.
Yep.
Oh no.
So I walked into the house one day and I had 50 Wi-Fi access points firing on my phone. I was like, oh god,
Oops.
this is going to be fun. I actually forked his motor and I hard coded my Wi-Fi credentials into the firmware, and I burnt that in.
That's pretty funny. Yeah.
So it's going to be even a bigger problem for me if I have to change
That's
my
funny.
Yes.
Wi-Fi.
Well, I guess because with Tasmodo you can do OTA updates, right? So maybe it's just recompile and just push. Push.
Yeah, look, and it's backlog command. Once it's on
Yeah.
the network, it's really nice to configure because you can backlog it. But that was
I bet.
that was not a good day. I gave my son some pocket money. I said to him, "Listen, if you walk around the house with my phone and you get all these devices back on the network, I'm going to give you a bunch of pocket money."
That's perfect.
You outsourced it.
Yeah. And maybe one last thing to talk about. Oh, one more thing to talk about is it was so coincidental that you guys were talking about beer in your previous episode because my son and I just recently decided to take a crack at brewing our first batch of beer. We're definitely not as sophisticated as your previous speaker, but we kind of said, well, we went through the whole process and we realized we needed something to maintain the temperature of the beer while it was fermenting. And of course, I thought this is a perfect use for Home Assistant, right?
Why not,
So
right?
we hooked up a little controller that just had a very simple lamp in the cupboard where it was fermenting for heat, and a temperature sensor. And so we knocked up a little automation that as soon as the temperature dropped below a certain point, it turned the lamp on, and when it went above a certain point, it turned it off. And that was it. It worked like a charm, right? So I can honestly say that my Home Assistant is controlling my beer brewing, which is fantastic.
That's funny. This is becoming a trend now. I'm just waiting for the fork of Beer Assistant.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think I'm a long way away from having a consumption-based beer monitoring system, but
that's funny. Awesome.
yeah. I guess in closing, it's I just wanted to say it's great to have such an active community, bunch of interesting people, people willing to share ideas, and I guess just encourage anybody who's thinking about it to get involved. Share your ideas. It doesn't matter how silly they are or how bright you think you are. It's if we start a dialogue, I think we'll just make Home Assistant better and better.
Agreed. Completely.
Yeah, totally agree. Well, Cliff, thank you so much for taking the time out and joining us today, sharing your story. I think you've sent us some photos of your Lovelace set up in your kitchen and all that. We'll leave them in the show notes, so if you want to take a look.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Cheers. If you want to share your Home Assistant journey or come on as a guest, reach out to us at feedback@hasspodcast.io. That's HASS podcast.io.
The Home Assistant podcast is hosted by Phil Hawthorne and myself, Rohan Karamandi. For links to topics that we discussed today, check out our show notes on hasspodcast.io.